So, hello and welcome for today's lecture entitled Designing the Analysis. This lecture comes after the topic on framing the problem. In that sense, after you've been able to scope out the problem that you want to do, now the analysis comes next. Um, and we'll talk a few ideas here, a few items on how we can actually design the analysis. So this lecture is not really about the analysis proper. In any case, the analysis that one might encounter can vary. It would depend on the domain of the problem, number one. It can also depend on the objectives that you as a consultant would like to accomplish. So there's obviously a lot of ways to do the analysis. But this particular topic, this particular lecture focuses on designing that task or designing that action. Okay. And so in this particular lecture, we'll talk about again, some of the basic ideas. Then two things. We will try to plot our analytical route. So how do we go about in the analysis? I mean, what are the techniques that would allow us to identify and settle on a particular way of analyzing things? And number two is how to speed up the decision making bit. Perhaps some of you might heard paralysis by analysis. We don't want that. Obviously, as a consultant, we have our stakeholders, our clients to take care of, and naturally they wouldn't want us to dilly-dally in terms of the work that we need to do for them. And then after discussing these two themes, we go and talk about some of the ways on how we can apply this, and then wrap up this particular lecture. So the basic idea, well, we know framing the problem is key, is important, okay, and we've talked about that in the previous session. At this stage, we gather as much data and facts as possible now. And the key thing here is that towards the end of the previous session or previous lecture about framing the problem, we said about coming up with the hypothesis. But the hypothesis is something like a living organism. Okay, it is never static. Like once you're done with the hypothesis and that's it. Okay, we've foreseen the possibility that hypothesis, in its no matter how good or perhaps how closely accurate it is, there will always be that possibility of being updated, of being tweaked to actually conform with whatever data we discover along the way. So the idea of developing that hypothesis, okay, and not being stuck with something static, okay, that's going to be what we should always keep in mind as we're going through our analysis, okay, eventually. Okay, so the first theme is how to plot our analytical route. And here are some four tips, if you may, on how to go about it. Well, first one is finding the key drivers. What are the major factors or the major components or the major drivers that you feel will be critical in your own analysis? Okay. Second idea here is to look at the big picture. Sometimes we can be too obsessed with the little things, with the details. Some of us might feel pleased or satisfied with the erstwhile beauty of the details, but always looking at the big picture is an important facet, important trait in every consultant's toolbox. Okay? We always want to do things with a sense of purpose, where we're not just simply doing analysis for analysis sake. Okay. Third idea is don't boil the ocean. Okay. Uh, there's this saying by Voltaire, which can be analyzed in two different ways, right? The best is the enemy of the good. Okay. Naturally, if you read it, we don't want to be mediocre, right? I mean, we want to be the best. We do our best, right? We don't want to be mediocre. But at the same time, we shouldn't be too perfectionist in our approach, and this is what's really meant by boiling the ocean. We don't want to be too sweeping or too exhaustive in our approach, and this is normally taken in tandem with the previous point about looking at the big picture. And last idea here in this theme of plotting our analytical route is sometimes you have to let the solution come to you. So not to stress ourselves too much, and in the sense that okay, if there doesn't seem to be a perfect solution, you'll encounter this later on that solutions are rarely perfect, right? Sometimes you'll have to make do with certain things with what you have, and other times there's really doesn't seem to be a clear path forward. Sometimes you just have to relax, rely on other resources, rely on the help of other people, and eventually the solution will eventually come to you. And the first idea, finding the key drivers. The success of most businesses, okay, depend on a number of factors, okay, but some are more important than others. Okay. When your time and resources are limited, okay, and that's going to be the case all the time, you don't have the luxury of being able to examine every single factor in detail. Instead, when planning for your analysis, figure out which factors most affect the problem and focus on those. Uh, it's easy to be too academic in our approach that you want to be very exhaustive with all of the factors. Okay? Like, theoretically, you might know that there would be 26 factors affecting your objective. But you might realize along the way that out of the 26, really only 3 contribute to the 90% of the outcomes. So why would you want to really cover all of the 26 when if you focus on the 3 big factors, again, they occupy 90% of the outcomes, then you're probably more prudent in focusing on those 3 rather than trying to go all of the 26. Okay. And drill down to the core of the problem instead of picking apart each and every piece. Okay, that's pretty much the idea here. Key drivers. Obviously, if a driver is said to be important, but you didn't factor that in, that's gonna be a misgiving on the side of the consultant. Okay? The consultant should have included that. But if it's a driver, okay, you know that that particular driver affects your outcome somehow, but it's not really key. I mean, when we say key, it's something that would really swing your outcomes widely if things don't go your way, right? Or if a driver is something that if that driver is negatively there's something negative in that driver, then your entire outcome is completely negative already, right? But if you have a driver, and if that driver is, okay, there was something bad with that driver, but it didn't really affect your entire outcome, then it's probably not a key driver. Now, the second idea is looking at the big picture. Okay? So when you're trying to solve a difficult, complex problem, you can easily lose sight of your goal amid the million and one demands on your time. Uh, Again, some of us in consulting like the excitement of solving a problem, right? It's like some math problem perhaps, and if you solve that math problem, boy, I mean you're going to right, you're going to feel satisfied by solving that problem. Well, in our case, well, we're not here to solve math problems. We're not here to do puzzles, right? For the sake of entertainment. Well, we're here to solve a problem by a client, by a different person who will be willing to pay us. So definitely there is that need and urgency to make sure that we deliver on time. So let's not get too sucked in to the allure of problem solving. Okay. Now, when you're feeling swamped by it all, I mean, that happens, okay, you take a step back, metaphorically. I mean, metaphorically, when you take a step back, you don't regress, like, you don't push back, you don't drop the project and say, I can't do this. No? I mean, take a break. take a step back, really take a look at the bigger picture. That's really what's being said here. That okay, with what you're trying to accomplish at that point, how does it relate with the overall objective? Are you still on track, or have you already deviated already from what you need to do? Okay, and then ask yourself how the task you are doing now fits into the big picture. Okay, is your team okay moving forward towards its goal? And later on, if you realize that it is not, then it is a waste of time. Okay, so immediately course correct, get back on track. Okay, and you know that time is too precious to waste. Again, you are not in the business of entertainment, of entertaining yourselves by solving puzzles. Okay, you're here to actually solve a problem faced by another person, by another organization. Okay, that's your goal. And don't boil the ocean. No, don't try to get everything. Okay, work smarter, not harder. That's the usual saying that we hear. In today's data-saturated world, it is easy to analyze every aspect of a problem. Right? I mean, with technology, computers right now, and currently with the use of analytics, big data, even. Oh, we can be tempted to say, oh, why don't we consider this factor? Why don't we consider that? Okay, we consider everything. But it's a waste of time if the analysis you're doing adds significant value uh, to the problem solving process. So you have to be strategic also. Everything that you get from your data gathering, you have to make sure that they really line up to what the ultimate objective is. Okay. Again, I'll repeat this, you're not in the business of entertaining yourselves by solving a puzzle, right? You're doing this because there is a practical need, okay, to solve that problem by another person, by another organization. And then from that, you just figure out which analysis you need in order to prove or disprove your point. Okay, and then do them, move on. Chances are you don't have the luxury to do more than just enough. Again, I mean the Voltaire saying the best is the enemy of the good, or the good is the enemy of the best, however you want to flip it. Well, there are times that good enough is much better. I mean, you don't really need to have like the most perfect answer to everything. As far as your client goes, as long as it makes progress, that might be enough. Okay? And then for the other things that you may have foreseen somehow, but you didn't really spend time to analyze, well, look at it both ways. One is you can look at it as an opportunity for an upsell, okay, or you can look at it as an opportunity to, to take a break and then maybe have others take a crack at that problem that would eventually pop up, okay, after you've done with your own engagement. And sometimes you have to let the solution come to you. Okay, every set of rules has exceptions. Okay, sometimes no matter how hard you think about it, you might be faced with a curveball. Like you didn't expect this to happen, but it happened. Or you're not really going to anticipate certain things, everything, and yet the thing that you did factor on appearing appeared. Okay, and sometimes, for whatever reason, you won't be able to form an initial hypothesis. Okay, that's even worse, right? Maybe tougher. I wouldn't say worse, but okay, but it's more challenging. It's more difficult. When that's the case, then you just have to rely on your own analysis of the facts available to point your way to an eventual solution. Sometimes you might be cracking your head and you might come up and say, well, I don't think there's a problem. It could be that way. It could be that there's no problem in the first place. Everything seems to be working fine. Okay? Well, feel confident that the facts tell you everything. Okay, sometimes if you encounter that situation wherein you feel there's really no problem, you have the facts in front of you, you have data in front of you, well, there could be one of two things. One is that the client is not really entirely, excuse me, the client isn't entirely um, maybe honest or didn't really disclose everything at the very beginning, or uh, In which case there could be some data that's missing, or that's not available to you, that you should have known. Okay. Or the second possibility is that maybe the client really didn't know that there's a problem. So in any case, if you can't come up with some clear path, okay, and in your own efforts you found out, based on your structure, based on your method, that there's no problem, then you just have to accept that. Okay. Or it may not be the solution that you've expected, but when you go through that process, you realize, well, the solution can be just this simple. And most clients would be faced with that, bittersweet realization. It's sweet because, okay, you solved the problem. The solution might even be simpler, but it's bitter because you've probably spent so much time and effort only to gravitate eventually to the solution that was simple, right? You might be cracking your head and say, why did I think about this in the first place? I mean, you probably have experienced that in the past, right? And it can happen in consulting. Now, the second theme that we're going to talk about is how to speed up the decision making bit. Okay, so there are four things that you want to keep in mind. Remember, when you're doing decision making, you don't really have the luxury of time. Okay, we've said it a while ago, and I probably won't get tired of saying this. We are not in the business of entertaining ourselves by solving puzzles. Okay, so first idea here: let your hypothesis determine your analysis. Okay. I mean that usually makes sense, right? Even in the scientific method, even in research, your hypothesis would determine your methodology, right? So let your initial hypothesis determine how you want to analyze the situation further. Get your analytical priorities straight. Okay. Third idea: forget about absolute precision. Sometimes, approximations would be enough. Okay. Uh, or a rough order of magnitude would be enough. You don't really need to be precise, down to the decimal point, as they say. And triangulating around the tough problems. Sometimes the problems are really hard to crack. Okay, maybe you need to apply a combination of techniques in order for you to be able to arrive at a solution to these problems. So let's go with the first idea. Okay, letting your hypothesis determine your analysis. Well, once you start your analysis, you have to balance right intuition against data. Okay, um, you realize eventually that both intuition, okay, or experience that would infuse your intuition, would be just as important as data or facts that you're faced with, right? So it cannot just be doing things out of gut feel, or doing things purely from how do we say this? Purely from a mechanical point of view of brute fact finding, okay, or fact checking. Okay, we have to make sure that we can balance things out. Okay. In contrast, many decision makers prefer to rely almost exclusively on their intuition, especially when time is short. Okay, and that is the thing. There's always this temptation to just go ahead and try to feel your way around the problem, right? And there could be a reason, or there could be that justification rather, that the client is pressuring you to come up with an answer now, okay, and you don't have time to gather all the data. Okay, there's going to be that temptation. But remember that both intuition and data complement one another. They help each other, right? In fact, data can help reinforce your intuition, can shape your intuition. At the same time, intuition would let you guide on what data would be important for you and what data is not, right? And you can weed out the bad data, okay? And you need at least some of each in order to have a solid basis for your decisions, okay? Again, not everything's going to be perfect. We'll talk about that in a while, about absolute precision, right? But understand that this is always going to be a combination of both. So the key to striking the balance is quality over quantity. If you have correctly designed your issue tree, which we talked about in the previous lecture, then you should already know what analysis you need to perform. You should have broken down the problem into issues and the issues into sub-issues. At some point, it may be 2 levels down the tree, or maybe a dozen, okay? It depends on how deep your tree would be. It depends on how deep the analysis you've gone into already, okay? The issues will have resolved themselves into a set of questions that can be answered by yes or no, okay? And you realize that, certain issues, they somehow resolve themselves. You can make credible assumptions about certain things that you don't really have to wait for things to happen, right? And you'll experience that. And sometimes it's easier for you to reduce certain things into a few items, few important items. Okay? But you can only do that if you allow both your data-driven method or technique to support, okay, or bolster your sense of intuition and experience, okay, and that would work wonders for you. Now, another way to focus your analysis is to start with the end in mind. Okay, the objective. What do you really want to happen? Okay. Now, there's this real danger for those of us who actually enjoy analysis, okay, getting caught up in the analysis for its own sake. Right? As we said earlier, paralysis by analysis. Again, we're not in the business of entertaining ourselves with puzzles. Okay? So let's not get caught up in paralysis by analysis. Okay? Definitely, there's a lot of data out there, and it can be a lot of fun to play around with it in all sorts of new and different ways. Okay? Unfortunately, if these analyses aren't working to prove or disprove your hypothesis, then you're just playing around. Okay? You're not really working towards coming up with a solution. Okay? And at the end of it, you're probably wasting time. Now, second idea in trying to speed things up is getting your analytical priorities straight. When you have limited time to reach a conclusion, and of course limited resources to attack the problem, you have to figure out which analyses are indispensable and which are simply gravy, or nice to have. Okay? One of the first steps in designing your analysis, you should therefore figure out what not to do. Okay? Sometimes it's tougher to decide things that you shouldn't be doing versus things that you should be doing, right? The instinct is always geared towards doing something, but it takes a lot of courage to be able to say that I'm not going to do this. Okay? Fighting against that temptation. Maybe it seems appealing academically, I mean, abstractly, it looks appealing to do this, but I decide not to do this because it will not add value to what I'm supposed to be doing, right? So this is the corollary of letting your hypothesis determine your analysis. Okay? Avoiding analysis that don't relate to your hypothesis. Okay? Maybe you can shelf that or you can park that for future work, right? But for now, that's not important. You've realized it's not important, then don't push with it down. Okay? As a next step, you should figure out which analyses are quick wins. Okay? Things that will really get you forward, okay? Easy to do, okay? No complications. Okay, and you should look for these quick wins. Okay? You should always look for these quick wins. Now, the third item here is forgetting about precision, absolute precision. There's this, I wouldn't say debate, but there's this discussion. What's the difference between accuracy and precision, right? Accuracy is if you're getting it right or wrong. Okay, in that sense. Okay, precision is how right are you. Okay, I mean that's the idea. When we talk about absolute precision, I mean this is the realm of the academics, right? And this would probably be important for mission critical work, like if you're in the aviation industry or if you're into space travel. If you don't get the math right, that could spell disaster. That I get. Okay? But for everything else, we're in the difference of a 0.001 versus a 0.002 won't really make much of a big impact in terms of overall experience, then you don't really have to fight over that. I mean, you'll just have to accept the fact that, okay, they'll probably just round themselves up. Okay? And that's what it is. The truth is, business is not an exact discipline like physics or math. Okay? It's not rocket science. And you will spend an inordinate amount of time and effort getting from mostly right to precisely wrong. I mean, that's a funny statement, right? When you're mostly right, you're in that zone you're in stable ground. And all of a sudden, because of your desire to be very, very precise, you might deviating from that area into something that's already completely wrong. Okay. Therefore, you should try to get an answer that is in the comfort zone. Okay. Um, Directionally correct and in the right order of magnitude. Um, okay. Once again, it is up to you to resist the impulse to get lost in the data, whether in yourself or your team, because it will cost you time and money. And the last point here is triangulating around the tough problems. Okay? In surveying and map making, triangulation is that method of determining the precise location of an unknown point when taking measurements from two known points. Okay, now you can use this idea of triangulating to form a hypothesis when you have very little information about the problem at hand. Okay, and sometimes that little information is not your fault. I mean, it could be the nature of the business. It could be just that there's not much data to work around with. Okay, in that case, don't despair. Chances are you can come up with some analysis. Okay, you can be creative around it. That will at least allow you to scope out the likely limits of the answer. Okay, even if they won't get you particularly close. So sometimes, in this way, or in this scenario, you'd be better off saying what it is not rather than what it is. Okay, and that maybe is enough. Maybe it's enough for you to know what it is not, because then you can make intelligent trade-offs already. You know that it's not like this, therefore you can do other things, right? Again, once again, if you're directionally correct and in the right order of magnitude, chances are that's enough to make a decision. Okay. Again, you don't need to be super accurate. Okay. You're not in the business of airplanes or space shuttles. Okay. But yeah, I mean that should be fine either way. So how do we go about and proceed with this? Well, the first tool that you can use is coming up with a comprehensive work plan. This is no different from, let's say, a simple plan or a project plan. Okay, that begins with all the issues and sub-issues you've identified during the framing of your initial hypothesis. Now, for each issue and sub-issue, you can list the following elements: your initial hypothesis, okay, your initial guess, what it might be, what analysis would be done in order to prove or disprove that hypothesis. Do you need to do a survey? Do you need to gather data? Do you need to do interviews? We'll talk more about the techniques of data gathering as we go along. Okay. The data necessary to perform the analysis, the likely sources of data. Would this be people? Would this be databases available for everyone? Or would this be databases that you need to pay? Okay. Maybe a brief description on what's going to happen at the end of the analysis. What's the output? What's the end product? Who's going to be the one responsible for producing that end product? Will it be you? Will it be somebody else in the team? And the due date. Again, you want to be able to do this analysis very quickly. So it's gonna look like something like this. It's not an exact picture, so to speak, but you can see in the first column, issue hypothesis. Okay, so you can see that. Okay, and you're on the leftmost side, and then you can see the particular analysis. Now you take a look that the main question: can we implement the necessary changes to the production process? They actually have like two sub issues. Okay, now for these two sub issues, these are the analysis that should be done or available. Okay. And they don't need to be very, very thorough. I mean, they just need to be adequate for your case, okay? So that for you to be able to move forward. Now, beyond laying out your life for the next several weeks and setting expectations for your team, a good work plan has another feature. It also helps structure your thinking. Okay? As you go through your work plan, write down all the analysis that you need to do, okay? And maybe prioritize or prune them. Prioritize, okay? Pick out the ones that you need to do right away because they'll probably spend you more time or more money, or maybe if you get an answer right away to this analysis, you can immediately resolve a lot of things faster, or prune them. You might realize that certain analysis is not really needed to answer the question. And then you'll eventually quickly see that there are holes in your initial hypothesis, okay, that didn't show up during the framing stage. So to wrap it up, when it comes time to prove your initial hypothesis, Having an efficient analysis design will help you hit the ground running. Okay? The work planning process also serves as a useful reality check to the sometimes intellectualized pursuit of the initial hypothesis. And once you've designed your work plan, it's time to start filling in the blanks. Okay, only you can do that with facts. So after this, we will talk about gathering data. So we're done with this particular lecture on designing the analysis. Again, if you have any questions about this particular topic, feel free to email me or drop me a note and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, and thank you and see you around. Okay, bye.